This is part 2 in an 8-part review series on The Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind. Morrowind is an open-world game, and the world of Vvardenfell is just as much a character in this story as any other, if not more so. Morrowind is, however, deceptive in its name, perhaps as is tradition in the Elder Scrolls series where Arena was anything but, Daggerfall was just a city and a whole country, Oblivion was a dungeon, and Skyrim wasn't an Elder Scrolls game.
Oh, that's clever. That's very clever.
The broader province of Morrowind has been stripped away and the focus has been placed on the island of Vvardenfell. Although unlike Arena, this time the lack of a name change is probably down to the fact that Morrowind is a better game name than Vvardenfell. There's a certain love video games have for islands. They are areas where invisible walls do not need to exist, where there is no boundary or limitation that players will hit while exploring. Vvardenfell as a game world is tight. Strip back the view distance or look at any map and realize that just over the crest of any hill is a rapid change in scenery. You can go from low-level civilization to high-level volcanic nightmare areas in less than a few hundred meters, but the terrain of Vvardenfell is its greatest asset. I have seen some theories made on this before, that the slow movement speed, plus the low view distance, makes Vvardenfell feel bigger than it actually is. Well, the slow movement speed isn't always the case, and one of the more common modifications I see people using strips back the view distance limit, so I don't think there is merit in this argument. No, the reason Vvardenfell feels like a big place, despite its small size, is that there isn't any wasted space. Ever play a game where you land on a planet that's procedurally generated and it's like any other spot on that planet? You quickly realize that the area isn't actually that big because the entirety of the planet can be summarized in that one spot. You can't go in any direction in Vvardenfell without running into something new. Even wandering off into the ocean generally results in you finding something, some underwater cave or shipwreck or feature. Everywhere you go is related to something, some quest or faction. It's dense enough to give the illusion of scale. So let's highlight some of these regions. The Bitter Coast region is the first region players will start in. It's generally only populated with low-level creatures, half of whom are fairly peaceful. It's mostly swamp, occupying Vvardenfell's southwest coast. Littered in this region are caves with smugglers in them, the smuggling business being a big part of Vvardenfell's economy since the island is under quarantine. It's actually not very populous though, as the terrain is obviously too unstable for construction. What spots are available are generally taken up by Dunmer strongholds, although some Daedric ruins in the area have rejected the notion of a sturdy foundation and have practically built themselves out of the ocean. Side-Aneen is the port town you start in. Narmak and Halaod are both backwater towns that dot the coast, usually filled with fishermen and smugglers. The northwestern coast of Vvardenfell, the West Gash, is a maze of ravines and jagged terrain. The lack of farms in the area suggests that the land is not as fertile as others, the rocky surface likely not being conducive to farming. This area is host to towns like Nisus, Kuhl, and Aldvalathi, operating more like fishing villages and trade hubs between Imperials from the coast and Ashlanders from the interior. The area is plagued with outcast Ashlander bandits, and its proximity to the channel that leads towards Skyrim means a fair few of the structures on the coast seem to be built more militaristically, a sign of the wars that often happened between the Nords and the Dunmer, or even dating back to the days of the Chimer and Dwemer when the land was named Resdain. It makes sense then that the factions that primarily operate in this region are militaristic in nature, with the Imperial Legion recruiting in Nisus, while House Redoran protects the lands, and the Tribunal Temple keeps the roads safe for pilgrims. Naturally, a part of Vvardenfell's volcanic ecosystem are the fertile lowlands at the base of Red Mountain. The Ascadian Isles forms a breadbasket that supplies the island. This is one of the many things I appreciate about Morrowind, the fact that it painstakingly shows where the area's food supply comes from. And it isn't just the odd farm. Large-scale plantations operate in the area, such as the Drin plantation, and slaves working the field is a common sight. It should be no surprise then that abolitionists keep their headquarters in this region. The roads see shade from the large mushrooms that dot the area, and peaceful netches are often seen flying around. The region is host to Pelagiad, on the road from Side-Aneen to Balmora. It appears to have originally operated as a way station for Imperials to travel from their dock to Moonmoth and further into the interior of the island, but is now a community of farmers and traders capitalizing on the popular route. Suran borders the edge of the Isles in Molag Amur. It is a walled city of Halau affiliation. Suran is notably the home of a pleasure house. Opposite Suran, Ebonheart sits as the head of government operations in Vvardenfell, housing representatives from the Great Houses and the Duke Videm Dren. It is another imperial dock, and also a fortress. And of course, across the water from Ebonheart, the great city of Vivec, home to the titular god of the Tribunal. The eastern shore of Vvardenfell, Azura's coast, is rather large, and owing to the treacherous terrain, scarcely populated. It's a series of small islands and reefs with a guarantee that the odd island large enough to host life does host life. Since Vvardenfell's waters are plagued with slaughterfish and drow, navigating the area by swimming is dangerous. This appeals to the isolationists in Telvanni, who leverages the region's dangerous nature to protect them. As a Telvanni once said condescendingly, "You can fly, can't you?" The Grazelands are a strange region. On the northeastern shore of Vvardenfell, they're bordered by a perfect north to south mountain range. Since they're surrounded by difficult to navigate rocky waters on one hand and ashlands on the other, they are barely colonized, despite their fertility. The area is full of wildlife like Gwar, Elite, Kaguti, and Nyx hounds. It's also an area where Daedra just wander around in the open since there isn't really anybody to stop them. The modern lack of access to the region is reflected in its ruins as well, as there are only a few Dwemer, Dunmer, and Daedric ruins. Its principal occupants are the people of Tel Voss as well as two Ashlander tribes, the Zainab and the Ahumusa tribes. North of Vvardenfell is Sheogorath, an archipelago. It is the backwaters of Vvardenfell, a remote area with little of value claimed by nobody. Its only settlement is full of miserable people. The island is home to Malakath worshippers, aka orcs, as well as necromancers, vampires, bandits. Really, it's the frontier that nobody wanted to conquer. You can't farm because the land is barely above water, and you can't fish because the water is rough and treacherous, so it provides little value to lawful individuals. Speaking of things nobody wants, the Ashlands. Existing in the shadow of the volcano, the Ashlands are in a perpetual state of being covered in ash. Since the land isn't valuable, it is primarily home to the Ashlanders who subsist in it. Bordering the Ashlands is Aldrune, capital of the Redoran, forced on the retreat through years of trouble until their back was up against Red Mountain. What lives out in the Ashlands? Daedra and their worshippers, vampires and their thralls, Sixth House cultists, necromancers, the undead, rogue Telvanni, cliff racers. The Ashlands are really a home to anyone uncommon enough to survive an area where food can't grow, where sea access is heavily limited, where trade routes are constantly changing due to ash storms, and where everybody is in a constant state of warfare with everyone else over what resources do exist out here. And this goes doubly so for Mal Agamor. Mal Agamor is all of those aspects that made the Ashlands untenable. If the Ashlands also happened to be a giant maze network full of lava pools that was even farther from society, if people lived in the Ashlands because it was remote and isolated but still close enough to civilization to buy groceries, people live in Mal Agamor because they hate civilization. Mal Agamor sits between the Escadian Isles and the Grazelands. There is literally one town here, Mal Agmar, which exists solely for pilgrims to prepare for a pilgrimage up to Mount Can. Red Mountain is Mal Agamor, but vertical, full of monsters, fenced off from the rest of Vvardenfell by a giant wall, the Ghost Fence, and constantly in the midst of a giant blight storm. What's a blight storm? It's an ash storm that spreads blight. The area is full of Sixth House cultists and corpus beasts, with the primary structures in the region being Dwemer. Red Mountain is, thusly, the most dangerous of the regions. So, when I was coming up with the graphic to highlight each region, I noticed two details I need to talk about. The first is that I actually forgot an entire region, the Vvardenfell Bay. And no, it's not because it's not notable, most factions visit it at least once, and the Telvanni playthrough is centered there. No, it's because I never noticed and basically figured this entire strip of land from Baal Fell near Vivec up to Tel Mora is basically just one really long Azura's coast. That's because, geographically, there really isn't much difference between Azura's Coast and Vvardenfell Bay, because I do not think the name of the bay is ever actually mentioned outside of generic dialogue with scouts. I noticed when I was highlighting Azura's Coast that it was really long, and so thinking to check the Game of the Year map, I found out it was actually two regions. The other thing is about this part of the map, where the Escadian Isles, Mal Agamor, the West Gash, and the Ashlands meet. It's a pretty significant chunk of territory that basically goes unclaimed. It's not really part of the Ashlands because those two areas are fairly flat, ashy areas, whereas this region is much more mountainous. But I don't think it's a part of Mal Agamor. The Guide of Vvardenfell refers to a section of Mal Agamor called the Great Scathes, which looked fairly interesting in the second concept map of Morrowind. Anyways, this region's supposed to be impassable, so I figured Mal Agamor has to end around here. This whole section of the map feels incomplete since it's probably the area with the least number of quests or reasons to visit. Anyways, that's just some some things I wanted to comment on while I was editing this video. I have ordered the regions of Vvardenfell in order of how terrible they are to be in. Naturally, the last of these regions is Vivec itself. Vivec is a large city, separated into 9 cantons. The Foreign Quarter, Halau, Redoran, Telvanni, the Arena, St. Olms, St. Delvin, the Temple, and the Palace of Vivec. These cantons are then separated by bridges from one another. These cantons are large structures with multiple layers. Atop them is a plaza, usually host to manors and wealthy businesses. Below that is the wasteworks, with more average businesses and commoners, and below that, a canal works, with services like the temple or tombs, and finally sewers, full of criminals. Vivec is unpleasant for several reasons. The first is that its large scale, at the time it came out on PC, and to this day on Xbox, posed a technical challenge for the game, which is surprising considering it's just a series of static cantons with the complicated parts going on inside the city itself. Barring the frame rate issues, there are still problems. The interiors of the cantons can only be reached from the second level. This means you need to run up to the giant ramps just to get inside. You didn't have to run around to the outside of the second level to reach the plaza, or in the case of the Foreign Quarters, around the canton, up another ramp, around the canton again, and then up to the plaza. Worse still, while the core 4 cantons, Redoran, Arena, and the 2 Saint cantons are connected at the second level, the Foreign Quarter, Halau, and Telvanni are not. To travel between these cantons, you need to go all the way to the bottom to cross. Some cantons are connected via a gondola system. However, these gondolas only connect the lower levels of the cantons. So assuming you arrive at Vivec to go to Halau Canton via boat or strider, you arrive at the northernmost point of the city, have to run around the Foreign Quarter bottom, cross a bridge onto Redoran, run around it, cross another bridge onto Halau, and then run up the ramp and either enter the wasteworks or run around the second level and enter the plaza. The words I'm looking for here are wasted space. You may have noticed if you were looking that the exteriors of Vivec are not ornamented. Seeing NPCs on the outside of the cantons are rare, and there are no market stalls. In fact, it can be difficult to tell at any point in Vivec where the hell you even are. This is only natural. Like I said, the city barely runs on the Xbox and barely ran back on the day in PC. I have a sneaking suspicion the plazas were originally intended to be exterior cells, but had to be closed up due to performance issues. God bless if you decide you want to use the merchant services in Vivec. There's no advantage over just going to the people you know outside the city. Most of them are oddly poor, they have a limited selection, and it's hard to just stop and go, I want to go to the Alchemist, and figure out where the nearest one is even supposed to be. Like, in Balmora, where's the Alchemist? Probably near all the other businesses. In Aldrune, where's the Alchemist? Probably near all the other businesses. In Vivec, where's an Alchemist? Maybe it's in the Wasteworks. Maybe it's in the Canal Works. Maybe it's in the plaza. Maybe it's in another canton. This isn't just an issue of me not knowing the city, it's an issue of the city being poorly laid out. And everything looks the same. Since everything is made out of the same adobe material, the principal colors of Vivec are brown and orange interiors, with dark brown exteriors. While most of the game uses the same principle of using cookie cutter pieces together to build interiors, nowhere did I feel the downsides of that design philosophy more than Vivec. Is this the studio apartment of a down-on-his-luck gay pauper? Or is it the secret hideout of the head of a criminal organization? So you know, the NPCs just play coy like, tee-hee, don't worry player, we get lost too. Like, that's the excuse of a defeated designer. It's not funny or cute when the end result is such a dreadful city. And if it was known at Bethesda that Vivec was such a terrible end result of what was an ambitious idea, then why are there still so many quests that entail navigating it? It's a shame too. Between Vivec and the Imperial City over in Oblivion, I think Bethesda became scared of trying to create large cities. So they went the inverse in Skyrim and had its capital be smaller than Balmora. To that I say, big cities don't need to be full of ornamented symmetry or repetitive architectural design, which create most of the problems people have when playing in them. Most big historical cities were chaotic messes that were poorly planned out. Create a capital city like that, instead of assuming the city planners of Tamriel share such clear, common values. Morrowind's soundtrack was composed by Jeremy Soule, the same guy who composed Oblivion and Skyrim's soundtracks. Fun fact, Morrowind's OST lost an award from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Science to Medal of Honor. just in case that series wanted to spread a little salt in my wounds. Another fun fact, there's an entire section on Wikipedia to sexual assault allegations that have yet to be confirmed factual or not. We've been listening to a bit of Morrowind's soundtrack in the background. While it is fantastic for casual listening, it did get a bit tiring hearing the same combat tracks. Then again, I played 100 hours of this game just for this series, so I am thoroughly overexposed to this soundtrack. The soundtrack is divided into two parts, explore tracks and battle tracks. There's also a death track and... No, please, it's not my fault! Now that the world has been introduced, we can talk about transportation. There is no simple one-click fast travel option in Morrowind, which was in fact the exception since the games before and after rely on it. In the case of Daggerfall, because the world was so large. In the case of Oblivion, because Bethesda was afraid kids on the Xbox would get bored. Instead, transportation becomes a major concern in the world of Vvardenfell. Every quest, once received, requires the simple thought process. How do I get there? What do I need to get there? And what will I need once I'm there to avoid needing to come back before I'm done? So let's introduce some of the ways of getting around quickly. Siltstriders are the first pillar of Morrowind's transit system. They are large insects with hollowed out shells that are ridden inside. They fill the bulk of the transportation needs from the West Gash through the Bitter Coast and into the Ascadian Isles, ranging as far as the northern village of Kuhl down to Molag Mar. While you ride, in-game time passes, usually only a couple hours, and it counts as resting time. The Caravaneers can serve as information hubs for the areas you arrive in, and having independent dispositions to the factions, meaning that you cannot unintentionally alienate them into disliking you. Boats are the second pillar of Morrowind's transportation system, circling the entire island and hitting all major fishing villages and ports, save Side and Neen. The boat system is robust, but is also time-consuming and expensive to boot. Still, some remote areas like Vvardenfell can only be reached via boat, and most of the Telvanni settlements are connected only by boat. Like the Caravaneers, the ship's captains are independent of faction affiliation. The Mages Guild serves as the third pillar. In 5 cities, a mage will facilitate instantaneous transportation. These cities include each Great House capital, Balmora, Aldrune, and Sadrith Mora, as well as Vivec and Caldera. While robust, they do carry a downside. The Mages Guild, as a faction, can be influenced by membership and deeds in other factions, and can be alienated into higher prices, or even denial of service. To give an example, House Telvanni and the Mages Guild are at odds, and membership in House Telvanni may require you bribe, admire, or charm the guild guides into providing services again. Since transportation is instant, you also don't regenerate health or magicka, which is another downside. That said, the Mages Guild is the only fast travel service in Caldera, and also can bypass several boat trips when heading out towards Sadrith Mora. The fourth pillar of transportation, teleportation magic. The mysticism skill, may it rest in peace, had a few handy spells that were actually really important, even to non-spellcasters. The first two are Almsavie and Divine Intervention. These spells teleport you to the nearest shrine of their relevant god, Almsavie to tribunal temples, and Divine to imperial shrines. Now, while the nature of the spell sounds like it should be reserved for emergencies, it shouldn't. Once business is finished and you are townward bound, interventions get you back to civilization quick. On the western half of the map, Almsavies are better. Divines tend to take you to Moonmoth and Buckmoth forts, which, while near Balmora and Aldrune respectively, both those towns have their own tribunal temples. On the flip side, Divine Intervention is very useful when operating in the eastern side of the map, since it can be used to quickly get to Wolverine Hall in Sadrith Mora, and from there, basically anywhere on the map. These spells are also available in scroll form, and even as amulets for those who can't muster up the skill to cast the actual spells themselves. However, the stars of the show are Mark and Recall. Mark, when cast, sets a marker where you're standing, Recall then teleports you to that marker. This greatly expands your options since you can mark stuff like merchants, quest givers, or master trainers, and quickly return to them. Propylons are a neat idea, but in execution are only really a reward for the sort of people that read the wiki, or who install the Master Propylon Index plugin. Each Dunmer stronghold has a Propylon chamber with 2 teleporters. If you have the index that corresponds with the teleporter, you can use it to travel to the next stronghold. The strongholds form a loop, but if you are missing any of the indexes, then you're forced to stop. The indexes, however, are rare. And I suppose the original idea was that they would serve as both a reward for long-term players, but also an option for vampires and criminals to get around. I don't know. The index's locations are rather obscure. Only a few of my characters I played for this video ever actually found an index. The most one character found was 2. The Master Propylon Index converts a Mages Guild NPC into a quest giver who will point you in the right direction for all 10 indexes, and as a reward will give you a Master Index. This turns Caldera into its own hub where you can go to any stronghold. However, this itself is only circumstantially useful. If you need quick access to one of the Ashlander tribes or a fast way out of a remote area back to civilization, I guess. Okay, now this is a tangent, but in the Dawnguard expansion in the Forgotten Vale, there were these teleporters that could quickly teleport you around the area, but you needed to unlock them. And I always thought, hey, that's pretty cool. Maybe Bethesda will go back to incorporating diegetic fast travel. Then Fallout 4 came out and basically killed that notion. Travel in Morrowind is itself interesting. It's not just running or walking around an area to go do stuff. Along the way, you can encounter unexpected quests, like lost pilgrims or naked Nords that have been tricked by witches, etc. You'll have to contend with monsters, like cliff racers, or unexpected contractions of diseases from cliff racers, or even just taking the time to explore a dungeon of cliff racers you find along the way. How you get there takes a good deal of planning. If you are tasked to go from Balmora to Aldvalathi, you could just walk out the door and start hiking, or you could stop, take the guild guide to Aldrune, then Strider to Cool, and walk a much shorter distance. I think you can get most anywhere in about 10 minutes provided you know how to take advantage of the fast travel. There are exceptions, of course, like the Ashlands or Mal Agamor, but most of the time this rings true. So why do I consider this superior to a fast travel system? If, in the end, fast travel is more convenient and lets me get to the meaty action faster. I will tell you in story form. I was contracted to take care of a bounty. He'd been spotted near Tel Mora, but this was old information. I find out in Tel Mora that his hideout is in a remote part of Sheogorath, so I now need to plan to go up there. I need water walking and cure disease potions. I need to decide if I should pay boat fare to come to Vvardenfell, or if I should go there from Tel Mora. After a short hike, I'm at the spot. Only the bandits are not. The cave itself leads into an ancestral tomb inside which is a vampire. This is not an enemy I'm prepared to fight, but from my perspective, it's possible that my target is behind the vampire, and so I need to fight her. This is a tough fight, and the tension builds as I know that while going back to town is a possibility, that would entail preparing and performing the journey all over again. I could set a mark, but then I would lose the remote master trainer I have it set to. Even though I can save at any time, that doesn't lessen the tension any because it just means I'll either be wasting my time walking back up or wasting my time save scumming until I kill her. Let's compare this situation with Oblivion or Skyrim. First of all, it's very rare that I would be put in a situation where I wouldn't be able to attrite an enemy down anyways. But assuming this isn't the case, and the enemy poses enough of a threat that I need to return to town, it's as easy as one button click. Then when I'm ready, I can instantly be back at the dungeon, because not only can I teleport back to town effortlessly, I can teleport to anywhere on the map as well. Any tension that is created as a consequence of having to repeat a journey is lost because at any time, I can just fast travel to safety. Further, tension can't be built up in the first place because I could have just fast traveled up to a nearby point on my first trip up there. This also applies to housing and quest givers. What's the point of carefully selecting a place to live out of if, at the end of the day, I can instantly fast travel there? What's the point of planning how I do my quests so I can complete multiple objectives while in the same region if I can always just fast travel to my objectives instantly? It's not even like in Daggerfall where there are time limits on quests, making the act of losing time a consequence in of itself. The world is always willing to wait for you. Oh, a hermit living in the middle of nowhere is the only person who can train you in marksman past skill level 70? Well, come on, stupid, just use a nearby cave as a fast travel point to get to him. I could go on, but I think I've illustrated my point. Diegetic travel systems in Morrowind helped Vvardenfell feel like a real world because you understand how it was that people get around. I'm not demonstrating my mastery of the systems as some Freudian way of self-admitting that I secretly long for fast travel. I'm demonstrating it because I want you to understand that this is a game that rewards you for learning how to navigate in this space effectively. Travel is an unspoken part of every single quest we'll be doing in Morrowind. Before, during, and after every single story point, I will be making decisions related to travel that I won't be telling you about, but will play a part of the story. Editing can cut out what is otherwise a massive part of the role-playing experience of Morrowind, hence why it deserves its own section up front and center.
This is where they want you. Head down to the dock and I'll show you to the census office.
Dedicating an entire section of one of these parts to a single town may seem somewhat unnecessary, as though I'm artificially padding out the length of the video. However, in this case I'm only doing it because of all my playthroughs, they have this one point in common: Saida Neen. The game starts simple enough, with a cutscene of Azura hinting at the plot, and then you awake to a shirtless man asking if you're okay and acquiring your name. After this, you're led onto the top deck, where a guard asks where you're from, selecting your race and customizing your character along certain preset faces and hairstyles. You're then led outside, where you are processed. You're first asked about class, where you can fill out a questionnaire, select from a list, or create your own. You then select your birth sign, are shown your character sheet, and asked to confirm the information, before being given documents and sent onwards. In the next room, you're given the option of swinging a free iron dagger around as practice. Craftier players can loot the place, or even use the lockpick on the table to unlock the chest filled with a small amount of gold. Outside, you're told to take a magic ring out of a barrel, introducing magic. Once inside the final room, you're introduced to dialogue. Dialogue in Morrowind is almost entirely text-based. Beyond the odd quest, most NPCs have a stock vocal greeting based on race and disposition, but 99% of the dialogue is performed in this window. Morrowind is a lot of reading, and I know that bothers some people, particularly the people that play while sitting on a couch with their brains turned off. I think if you're committed to watching this series, you probably are not this sort of person. Now, I know reading can be difficult, but believe it or not, there are some good reasons it is superior. Dialogue is split into topics. You can then ask about a topic and the NPC will elaborate on it. Wait, did you say that text-based dialogue is superior? Well, that can't be true. Well, it is, and here's why. First of all, text-based dialogue is friendlier to a low-budget game. Modern Elder Scrolls may be a top-dollar production, but back when Morrowind was coming out, it was a risk that Bethesda took to save the company from an eternity of producing shovelware title after Battlespire and Redguard underperformed. And although it looks like a lot, it really isn't. 400 words is just over 3 minutes of speech. For instance, since I started talking about this tutorial, I have said about 400 words. I believe most people see a disparity between how long it takes to read the written word versus listen to it. I can't knock listening versus reading entirely, considering you are listening to my words, not reading them. But while you may look at the dialogue on screen and say, yeah, fuck all that, consider that something that is written is not limited by the reality of it being spoken aloud. In fact, a great deal of the strengths presented in Morrowind's storylines owe themselves to the detailed explanations one can receive. I can't help but think that Morrowind is impossible to remaster for the simple fact that Bethesda would have to change so much just to make the dialogue all fit on any hard drive made by man, because naturally something Bethesda would try to do in a Morrowind remaster is voice acting. However, there is another reason, and it has to do with logistics. It is not just a coincidence that stuff like directions to the quest location disappeared around the same time voice acting came about. Oblivion's voice acting was a nightmare for Bethesda because it meant that everything had to be written with the idea in mind that it had to be spoken aloud, saved, and take up file space. So no longer could you have quest givers explaining how to get to a spot because they likely couldn't afford much more than the bare essentials when it came to voice acting. Quest markers were as much a consequence of laziness on the part of players as it was a consequence of laziness on the part of Bethesda. This was one of the reasons I was horrified at the prospect of player voice actors in Fallout 4. Not because being spoken for bothers me, but because it meant that there had to be a severe limitation on what the player could now say. I mean, Bethesda's developed games hardly ever provided more than 4 options in dialogue, but now they really couldn't if it meant paying a voice actor for the extra words. Just as I said that 400 words was 3 minutes, 400 words of written dialogue was now 3 minutes of voice actor pay, assuming they didn't flub up the lines in the process. You can't afford to have voice actors talk about the latest rumors or little secrets or advice or give directions to somewhere specific or someone in particular or casually elaborate on topics because that costs money, and that is money that could be spent on hiring expensive voice actors for set-piece quests. Once outside into Cydanine proper, we're given a small stipend and directions to go to Caius Casati's house in Balmora. Now, of course, you could just beeline it there. The Silt Strider in town goes straight there for much less than we got. But let's talk about short-form tutorials. There are two kinds of tutorials, long-form and short-form. A long-form tutorial gradually introduces all the mechanics, how they work, and make sure that there is nothing that can surprise the player because the developer is afraid they won't see it, they won't engage with it. Short form is, then, naturally less insulting. Morrowind's tutorial does not take you aside and teach you about magic, because not all characters are going to use it. Likewise, it doesn't force you to use security because some players might see stealing as a bad thing. When it introduces the plot elements, it doesn't have a dragon swoop down from the sky to save you from an execution. It just tells you, hey, the Empire's releasing you on parole provided you complete these conditions that can be easily ignored. It doesn't have the Emperor get assassinated by Mehrunes Dagon cultists as he hands you the amulet that is protecting the world from invasion by demons with the instruction to find a priest at a priory and help him find his illegitimate son. It's just like, explore this port town and get used to how things work. And it does so in a way that isn't going to hurt you in the long run. Cydanine has barely anything to do with anything after you leave town, so hurt feelings get left behind. Speaking with people, you can meet Fargoth, who mentions he lost his ring. Sure enough, the one you found is his. And returning it to him gives you a disposition booth with both him and the town trader, netting better prices. While at the trader, you can meet a Nord who wants to collect Fargoth's debt, who tells you you can watch from the watchtower to see where his hiding spot is. Then you can take the money and leave. This teaches some good lessons. It teaches you that doing good things in the world, even for unimportant people, can get you bonuses. It also teaches you that sometimes the best quest reward is the one you don't turn in. Another quest in Cydanine starts after you find a body in the swamp. Turns out it's a local tax collector. If you're honest and turn in the money he was carrying, you'll be tasked with solving the murder. If not, you keep the money but end up with a net lower reward. Asking around, you find out the tax collector was in a relationship with a lady in the lighthouse who says that he got in a fight with a guy and asks you bring her ring back. You can confront him and he will admit it, giving you a choice. Kill him and get paid, or spare him and get nothing.
And the choice is yours.
Then, should you kill him, you get the ring. But remember, sometimes the best reward is the one you don't turn in. You can leave Cydanine with over 1,500 gold provided you do things right. Quests teach lessons, while introducing ideas in a safe manner that isn't going to affect your faction reputation down the line. Cydanine is the second best tutorial I've played in an RPG. To me, it can be a fast affair done quickly before I get into the meat of what I really want to do. Or it can be done slowly by a new player learning the ropes of the world. As for the best, well, it rhymes with Spudgrings. Getting to Balmora can be done three ways. Go north and follow the river, go south and go by Pelagiad, or take the Silt Strider. Each one has its own benefits. The Silt Strider is the fastest, but costs money. North can lead you by some valuable loot. South can take you by some interesting quests. Once in Balmora, you'll be directed to the Corner Club to learn where Caius Casati's lives. And there you'll be told about certain opportunities that will come up in Part 3. And finally, once you meet Casati's, he says those golden words. Go out on your own, look for freelance work or trouble. Then, when you're ready, come back, and I'll have orders for you. For open world games, this is such a simple thing that is so often forgotten. In so many of these games, I wonder, when am I supposed to actually engage with the world? Because so often they drag us quest to mission with the utmost of urgency. I'm the sort of person to do what is the most urgent matter first, a reasonable person. And so often I can burn through an entire game before looking back and realizing, hey, wait a second, when was I supposed to actually engage with the world? So, word of advice. If you're making an open world game and put some measure of effort into making the world interesting, please give people an opportunity to step off the train and play tourist for a little while. Let's talk about character creation, since I went through it 7 different times. Both for Morrowind and in general, really. I see lots of people spend tons of time agonizing over every detail of character creation and worrying if they have created the perfect character or if they need to stop. Just stop. Here's how you create a character in Morrowind. Step 1, create your character. Step 2, find problems. Step 3, recreate the character, having addressed the issues. For example, if you think your movement speed is too slow, take the birth sign the steed that makes you faster. If you think your character is too fragile, reconsider your race. If you find out you like maces and not swords, set blunt as one of your skills. Just identify a problem you have and see if you can fix it. Morrowind's intro is so short it can be redone fairly quickly. In fact, if you already know what you're going to do, you can be out in the world adventuring in a matter of minutes. And it's not the end of the world if a character isn't perfect either. If you decide later down the road you want to use a different skill, all it costs is money to train that skill up to a usable level, and there is plenty of opportunity to make money in Morrowind. Morrowind has 10 races that you can play as. Each race has certain specialties and weaknesses, and these can vary from gender to gender as well. For elves, there are Altmer, Bosmer, Dunmer, and Orsimer. Altmer are mages, Bosmer are thieves, Orsimer are fighters, Dunmer are a bit of a mix of everything. You can be iconoclastic, making an Altmer barbarian or an orc wizard, and you will experience some short-term difficulties, but nothing that kills it in the long term. For men, there are Bretons, Imperials, Nords, and Redguards. But Redguards aren't actually at Morrowind. Shut up. Bretons are good at magic, Nords and Redguards are good at fighting, Imperials are good at conning people. Not quite the RPG triangle, but then again Morrowind was more about accurately reflecting these people to the lore and their cultures than it was about balance. Lastly, there are two beast races, Argonians and Khajiit. Races are distinguished in a few ways. Attributes change to favor certain specializations with certain races, and some magic-oriented races get a bonus to their overall magicka pool. Races also see bonuses to certain skills, again relevant to their specialization. So a Bosmer who selects Marksman as a major, or Khajiit with a major in acrobatics, or Redguard with a major in longsword, will all have the highest of that relevant skill at the start of the game. There are also resistances to consider. Some races claim a substantial resistance to disease. Others see resistance to spell effects. Using fire on a Dunmer or frost on a Nord doesn't work because logically they come from those climates. Altmer, on the other hand, boasts a substantial weakness to certain kinds of magic rather than a resistance. Another factor to consider is disposition. Members of the same race as you will have a slightly higher disposition towards you. Remember that the average person is a Dunmer, and you can see certain advantages in playing one. Gender can also be a factor. Your attributes can differ based on gender, although it tends to be balanced so you're actually just trading one attribute for another with the counterpart's sex. There are also certain quests that go differently based on gender, but I don't think there are any quests that differ outcomes based on race. Each race has abilities catered towards their specialization. Imperials have an ability that makes them more persuasive, while orcs and redguards have abilities that help them fight. Simple stuff like that. I'd usually forget they were there by the end of a playthrough. So yeah, one simple way of making a decent character would be syncing their choice in race and class to what makes sense, like, orc wizard. Birth signs are another part of character creation. This is basically a mix of the starter gift and modifier idea from past games. Originally, I was gonna spend a few minutes listing all the signs, but it was kinda dry and boring, so I'll just highlight a few. The steed makes you run faster, the warrior and the lover can boost your chances with hit chance, the mage, apprentice, and atronach increase your amount of magicka with increasing downsides the more magicka you get. You'll do better in conversations with the lady, and with the ritual you'll get a massive daily healing power. Which sign is objectively the best? Well, the atronach is a bit broken, and I'll demonstrate why later. It's honestly hard to say because all of them, besides the atronach, become very circumstantial in usefulness past level 5. Morrowind isn't the sort of game that makes later playstyles impossible due to early bad decision making. Bad decision making mostly just impacts how quickly you'll reach the inevitable power threshold, not whether or not you'll cross it. But if you are somebody who has a serious stigma against Morrowind because it's too slow or you dislike hit chance, there are baked-in solutions to the problem to help you out. So I did the little survey that tells you which class to play, and I got Monk. Sounds about right. The survey is a personality test that tallies your responses and compares them with the stereotypes of the class, so fighting heavy responses get fighting heavy classes. But since it's mostly moral choices, I don't really put too much stock in it. You can also pick from a list of presets, and the classes are going to operate about how they sound, but you have to think about it. Like if you pick Knight, you have to use the weapons Knights would use, or you're in for a rough time. This is why the class creator is the best option. Although it's also obviously the option that requires a bit of knowledge about the... No, it doesn't require knowledge about the game. If you want to use swords, put Longblade in the major skill box. All skill names operate basically at face value. Specialization corresponds to the 3 archetypes of RPGs, giving skill buffs in those fields. Attributes are again fairly self-explanatory. You don't really need to understand the nuances of how the skills and attributes work to craft a functional class that will work for you, provided you stick to the skills you select or train the new skills you have at a trainer. But I will give some handy advice. First off, always take Speechcraft and Mercantile. This is because these 2 skills will be useful regardless of playstyle in the completion of quests and acquisition of wealth. With 8 skills left, I generally have a hard time picking enough skills per playstyle. No, really. Endurance is handy in generating some extra health per level early, and personality can help with the early game gold grind. The rest of the attributes will raise up as you level, and they aren't really a concern from any other standpoint. So I hope you see that creating a character isn't really a big deal in Morrowind. In fact, because the Great Houses are exclusive to one another, to see all the content you have to play multiple characters, barring that one glitch that lets you join 2 houses. New game is a prevalent option in the main menu at all times because Elder Scrolls is meant to mirror your tabletop gaming experience where you don't just stick with the one character. Unlike the later games, which were made literally with the design philosophy of avoiding players feeling the need to restart because of the character they created, which is absurd. Because even if you make a bad character, it's not at the end of the world in Morrowind. There's training and a difficulty slider. If you've made it this far, and you feel tempted to play Morrowind, I can give you 3 template characters that will make the game fairly easy for new players. Each template follows one of the 3 archetypes. The first is a warrior who uses the most common weapon and armor. With a long blade of 50 and an agility of 65, as long as you use a sword, you'll be able to hit monsters and with a strength of 50 do some decent damage. Endurance and personality have also been selected to help with gains and conversation. The second is mage. Again, endurance and personality have been picked over intelligence and willpower, resulting in a smaller magicka pool, but also a less fragile character. With bases touched in all the early game magical skills, this class shouldn't have issues in the early game with casting magic. Breton plus the apprentice gives you a large pool of magicka to work with. The third is a thief. Focus has been put into marksman and light armor. This is the most fragile of the 3, but an agility of 75 and a marksman of 50 means that you aren't going to miss shots with a bow, and short blade has been selected as a backup weapon. Sneak and illusion are also selected to make stealth-oriented playstyles work. Playing outside of these archetypes is easily possible, but I recommend playing inside them for your first time just to get a handle on how skills work before trying anything crazy like Orc Wizard.